The Lion Men of Mongo by Raymond. This is a Flash Gordon book. I don't know where to throw that into the whatever, but anyway. Chapter 1. Everything went well until 10 minutes before set-down time. The interplanet survey ship then began to have trouble. The temperature in the oval control chamber started to climb rapidly, at first half a degree at a time, then in jumps of 5 and 10 degrees. We will raise the temperature of your Earth by 1,000,000 degrees each day, but in 5 days. Okay, sorry, just kidding. That wasn't part of the book. Okay. The central control panel grew stove hot. Tiny wisps of acrid blue smoke uncoiled from some of the grids and rows of bubble lights. Dr. Zarkov, a big burly man with furious black beard, had been bent over the scanning monitors studying the multiple views of the terrain of the planet they were about to land on. "Palmesse," he said in his booming voice. "Excessively large, but palm trees nonetheless, exactly as I expected. And there are stands of large cypress-like trees. Yes, what I anticipated. What's this now?" He squinted, putting his broad face nearer to the center of the viewing screen in the bank of 5. "Yes, Chrysopis, Mariana, and Hyracum scabum. But unlike those of our own Earth system of planets, where they grow to heights of 8 or 10 feet, these devils are 20 feet tall if they're an inch." He gave a chesty chuckle, rubbing his knobby hands together. "Did you also," asked Dale Arden, "expect trouble with our ship?" She was a slim girl in her middle 20s, dark-haired, wearing a lightweight, pale blue jumpsuit. Zarkov blinked, looking up at his research assistant. "What's that?" Dale, seated on the edge of her inflated plyo chair, pointed in the direction of the control panels. "How serious is it, Flash?" In the piloting seat, Flash Gordon shook his head, keeping his eyes on the controls in front of him. "Don't know," he said. "I'm switching over to the backup systems and we'll see." He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, a year away from 30, with blonde hair and an even outdoor tan. Zarkov bounded across the cabin, his work boots thumping on the normal plastic flooring. "There can't be anything wrong," he boomed. "I designed this ship myself, equipped it especially for this pioneer exploration of Mongo." The heat in the metal-walled room kept jumping higher. More smoke was pluming up out of the control panels. "I can't get any response from the landing mechanisms. Can't punch up a landing pattern, though I don't see why." Flash made one further jab at a series of toggle switches to his left, all frozen, including the backups. "Impossible," said Zarkov as he dropped to his knees. "But since the impossible seems to be happening, we'll have to use our second set of backups." He pushed down a row of switches below the ones Flash was struggling with. "There." "Still nothing," Flash told him after a second. "We don't seem to have any control over the ship." Stretching up and whipping an electric screwdriver out of his hip pocket in his one-piece worksuit, Zarkov attacked a panel in the cabin's low ceiling. "I made test flights in this damn ship myself, back on our base planet. I can't..." He got the plate unscrewed, tossed it aside, and thrust one big rough hand into the opening. "This is something akin to open-heart massage. It should, I believe, get our landing mechanisms going again." Flash waited 5 seconds more, then said, "Everything's still frozen, Doc." Dale had risen and was standing beside Flash. She touched his shoulder with her one slender hand. "Looks like we'll have to ditch." "Ridiculous," snorted Zarkov, holstering his screwdriver. "I designed this craft to be foolproof, which I guarantee it is." He gave his ample beard a tug. "Besides which, I sank nearly all of the Plan Explo Foundation's last grant into building this crate. If it smashes up, there's $20 million in a pile of rubble." 20 million. "Dale's right, Doc," said Flash. "It's either ditch or crash." "I can't let..." "Okay, look," cut in the tall blonde man. "You and Dale get out. I'll keep fiddling. That way you two are safe, and maybe we can save the ship too." The girl's hand tightened on his shoulder. "There's no point, Flash. It's too dangerous," she said. "Even if we lose the ship, all we have to do is get off the planet, is radio back to Zarkov's orbiting workshop, and one of his robots will..." If it looks like I can't save the ship, I'll radio and get them to send a rescue craft, Flash assured her. But I want to try and save this thing first. Now you and Doc get ready and use the escape tube. This isn't right, Flash, protested Zarkov in his booming voice. As the designer of the ship, I should stick with her. Flash grinned. It's the captain who's supposed to go down with his ship. Dale had sprinted to a wall cabinet and was breaking out 3 flying safety belts. There's one here for you, Flash. Reluctantly, Zarkov strapped on the device. These belts are based on my own designs, remember? So they'll register the exact place where Dale and I land on your rescue monitor there. Nodding, Flash said, Once I get the ship safely down, I'll come back for you. Good, good, boomed the bearded scientist. We'll stay exactly where we land and wait for you. After strapping on the flying belt, Dale bent and kissed Flash gently on the cheek. We'll see you soon. I guarantee it, he said, using one of the doctor's favorite phrases. The slim girl crossed to the trap door of the escape tube. She dropped from sight and was ejected from the craft. 20 million isn't everything, reminded Zarkov as he approached the tube hatch. So don't be too foolhardy, Flash. If you figure you can't bring her down, jump too. Don't worry, Doc. The heat inside the survey ship's cabin was now up to 120 degrees, according to the temperature gauge on the control panel. Smoke was swirling thickly. Flash continued to struggle with the buttons, switches, and toggles of the intricate control board. There was still no response. 5 minutes after Dale and Zarkov had jumped free, Flash finally pushed up out of the piloting seat. Doc and Plan Explo won't like this, but I'm going to have to give up and get out. He noted the positions where Dale and the doctor had landed. Then he strapped on the flying belt and started toward the radio communications panel in the far wall to get in touch with the robots on their orbiting workshop. But before he reached it, the ship began to wobble wildly. Flames howled out of the control board, and then the ship was plummeting down toward the ground. The Lion Men of Mongo by Alex Raymond, adapted by Con Steffanson. Didn't say that last time. Chapter 2. They were coming in through the gaps and rents in the twisted metal, in through the sprung emergency door. Slithering down the pocked walls, crawling over the black-smeared control panels toward the blond man stretched out on the cabin floor. Snake-like, but a watery orange in color, with red-rimmed suction pads running up and down their doughy bellies. 24 of them, each 6 feet long, oozing across the floor of the crashed survey ship, forked tongues flicking out through jagged fangs. Flash groaned, stirring, his left hand flexing and unflexing. He lay sprawled on his back. The lead the lead reptile was now within a yard of him. It began to form an angle, its head rising up and swaying. Opening his eyes and seeing this nightmare, Flash murmured, I wonder if Zarkov was expecting anything like this. Very carefully, he worked his right hand down to his holster. He eased out his blaster pistol and pointed at the swaying creature. Back, he warned. The reptile's head jerked as it prepared to strike. Flash fired the pistol. There was a sizzling cracking sound, and the head that had been jabbing through the air was gone. For an instant, a sooty image hung there, then it vanished to nothing. A second dull orange reptile poised to attack Flash. Again the blaster pistol crackled. The other creatures halted. In another moment they were quivering away, squeezing out of the ruined ship through the holes and tears in the metal sides. Each of them left a wide trail of pale blue slime behind. Dodging the crisscross of slimy trails, Flash went to the radio communications wall. Not exactly a perfect set-down, he said as he surveyed the wrecked cabin. He found that the communications equipment, too, was ruined, meaning there was no way to report the crash. The robots in the orbiting lab were not programmed to initiate a rescue on their own, an economy measure Dr. Zarkov had reluctantly decided on. Flash swiftly made a circuit of the cabin, determining what equipment could be salvaged. There was nothing, unfortunately, to enable him to communicate with the flying workshop. He decided he would leave most of the portable equipment and food supplies here for the moment. In a plyo rucksack, he packed emergency rations, 2 extra blaster pistols, and a few other gadgets. They could come back for the rest later. He attached a hunting knife to his belt. It was mid-afternoon outside. Flash guessed he'd been unconscious for an hour. Dale and Doc should still be waiting for me, though. Walking to the emergency door, which hung lopsidedly open, he looked out. He saw a stretch of tough brownish grass, the boles of huge palm trees. Dozens of gold insects were swirling low to the ground. There was no sign of the reptiles who had made a try for him. Flash took a deep breath before dropping out of the ship and down to the soil of Mongo. The air was humid, fuzzy. He stood on the rough grass, looking up at the bright alien sun. Then he checked his compass, nodded to himself, and set off to find Zarkov and Dale. A new space warp process, perfected in part by Dr. Zarkov himself, had recently opened up the Mongo system of planets to exploration. Prior to that, they had been too distant from Earth and the other planets who shared her sun. With Dale and Flash, Zarkov had already explored one of Mongo's sister planets. He had determined that all the planets in the system were life-supporting, and that all of them might have humanoid inhabitants and fairly advanced cultures. He didn't say anything about those snakes, though, Flash said to himself as he worked his way through the twisting, twining underbrush which cluttered the spaces between the enormous palm trees. High above him, 100 feet or more, a giant palm fronds met to make a bright green roof over much of the jungle below. A profusion of giant butterflies, hundreds of them, wheeled and glided high up. They were scarlet, silver, bright blue, and glaring white, passing through dark shadows and stripes of intense hazy sunlight. Near and far, birds called in falsetto hoots and tinny squawks. After nearly 15 minutes, Flash noticed he was approaching some kind of trail. Man-made, too, he guessed. The road cut through the thick jungle. It was roughly 30 feet wide, dusty. He calculated this road should lead him fairly close to the spot where Dr. Zarkov should have come down, provided his flying belt is working a little better than his survey ship. A sad-eyed monkey calmly watched him pass. It hung by its tail from a low branch of a gnarled tree beside the roadway. It was the size of a 3-year-old child, covered with fine silvery hair. When Flash had been traveling for over an hour, he paused. "I covered quite a bit of ground before the ship cracked up," he said to himself. "Looks like I'm not going to hit the first rendezvous spot for a while yet." From up ahead, he heard something. The road curved and he couldn't see around the bend. There came a dry creaking sound and a forlorn rattling. Flash moved into the brush again, working his way cautiously around the bend. On the far side of the road, he saw a huge twisted oak-like tree. A dead man was hanging from the tree. The Lion Men of Mongo, Chapter 3. The dead man had been hanging there a good while. Birds and insects and time had been at work on him. The thick chains which held his wrists and ankles together were rusted. The rope which had broken his neck was now a greasy black. His clothes had lost most of their resemblance to clothes, and were filthy strips and tatters. But the sign in crude black letters tacked to his chest was still quite legible. He possessed a forbidden weapon. Flash stood looking up at the gently swaying corpse. So there are men on this planet, he reflected. They don't treat each other very well, and to have a weapon is a hanging crime. He resumed his trek. He tapped the holster on his side. I wonder what kind of weapons are forbidden. He unfastened the holster, removed the blaster, and thrust the holster back into his rucksack. The gun he stuck in his waistband where his tunic hid it from sight. 5 miles further along the road, he saw another dead man hanging from a tree. This man had not been dead as long as the other one. He had been hanged and chained in the same way. The sign on his chest announced, "Executed by order of Emperor Ming. He stole food." A very harsh society we've dropped into, Flash said to himself. To kill a man for taking food. He walked on, looking back once over his shoulder. Be interesting to see what kind of reception this Emperor Ming gives us if we ever meet him. After a few more minutes, he added, At any rate, Zarkov will be happy to know his lingual translator works. Prior to the initial trip to the Mongo system of planets, the Doctor had had a micro-miniaturized device implanted in Flash, Dale, and himself. He guaranteed it would translate any written or spoken language they encountered and enable them to respond in kind. Eventually, the light of the late afternoon began to fade. A fuzzy darkness slowly filled the jungle. Flash halted. "This should be just about the spot Zarkov came down," he said as he glanced around. "Dale will be further on." The flying belt was designed so that the wearer could control his descent. Unless something had gone wrong, the Doctor would have been able to set himself down in a clear spot on the road and not in among the tangle of trees and brush. But he was not there. "Zarkov," Flash called through cupped hands. "Doc, are you around? Hey, Zarkov." 3 crimson birds rattled up along the brush, flew off into the gathering dark. "Zarkov, Doc." Flash noticed something stuck on a thorny bush on the roadside. It was a shred of cloth. He plucked it free, a tough tan material. "Torn from Zarkov's work suit," he said. "And this looks like a splash of blood on it." From his rucksack he took a small round flashlight which fit into the palm of his hand. Near the place he'd found the blood-stained swatch, he discovered footprints. "Yes, Doc's boot made that one for sure. These other ones, though, they're sandals of some kind." A few yards further along were signs of a struggle. Footprints intersecting, brush trampled, branches broken. But no more blood, which is maybe a good sign. No, Flash said that. But no more blood, which is maybe a good sign. Flash bent to study the footprints. 2 or 3 big men at least. Well, it would take that many to overpower Zarkov. He swept the beam of his palm light over the road. Now let's see where they took him. There were indications the men who'd attacked Dr. Zarkov had carried him across the road. Brush and tall ferns had been pushed aside to allow passage into the jungle. Shining the light into the thickness of the darkening forest, Flash decided, "That's going to be a tough trail to follow. I'd better find Dale first. This jungle doesn't seem too hospitable a place even for broad daylight. No telling what it'll be like after dark." He clicked off the light and started to run, at a steady jog along the road. The night closed in, killing the last of the twilight. There was a clearing to the right of the road at the location where Dale should have landed. An oval pool lay in the center of the clearing. Frogs croaked hollowly beyond the pool's far edge. "Dale, it's Flash. Are you here?" A rustling commenced along the trees next to the pool. "Dale, is that you?" Out of the dark, a raspy voice said, "If you seek the young woman, I can tell you where they took her." Chapter 4. It was a small bent man who spoke to Flash across the jungle pool. He wore a simple mud-colored tunic laced with leather strings, rough spun tights, and low boots of soft hide. His hair was long and unkempt, speckled with gray. Several of his lower front teeth were missing. "You are an outlander," he observed in his harsh, raspy voice. "As was the girl." Flash, keeping his light shining on the man, circled the pool. There didn't seem to be anyone else lurking in the woods. "You saw the girl?" "Oh, yes," replied the bent man. "Saw her as clear as I'm seeing you now, nay, clearer, since it was still day. A pretty girl, with dark hair. Too pretty. That's the trouble." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Outlander, that is why they took her." Stopping a few feet from the man, Flash asked, "Who was it that took her?" "The Royal Police it was." He rubbed at his sharp chin. "Tied her up and carried her off in his saddle, did the captain of police." "She was arrested?" The bent man gave a dry, wheezing laugh. "Too pretty for that, didn't I tell you? No, Outlander, they took her to the capital. You see, our emperor is always interested in pretty young girls, and many's the maiden who'd been dragged away to the imperial palace." "You're talking about Emperor Ming." "Aye, Ming, ruler of the dozen territories," he said. "And soon, if he carries out all his plans, ruler of all the planet." "How long ago did they take her?" "There is no chance to catch them," said the bent man. Should that be what you're thinking of? True, they were on horseback, the two royal police who took her. By now, though, they have placed her aboard a flying ship and flown her to Ming's palace. How far from here is the capital city? 300 miles. Where can I arrange to fly there? The bent man's rasping laugh was louder this time. Would you end your life hanging from one of these trees, Outlander? He replied. You mean the use of airships is forbidden, too? To all save the royal police and those in the Emperor's inner circle, the bent man explained. If you would journey to the capital, however, I can show you the best route to take. My name is Harn, and I oft-times serve as his guide. Flash decided he wouldn't go back and follow the trail of Dr. Zarkov, not now at any rate. The burly scientist was capable of taking care of himself for a while. It was Dale he must find, as soon as possible. Very well, he told Harn. I'll accept your offer. My usual fee, Outlander, is 5 mingots a day. I have none of your local money. Eyeing the pack strapped to the tall man's back, Harn said, Perhaps you have some goods, some objects of value from your own land which can be exchanged for coins. There is an inn not far from here, the Heart and Arrow, and the innkeeper and a long-time friend of mine. He, even in those lean times, usually has a supply of ready cash to pay out for certain marketable items. After studying the man's lean, wrinkled face for a few seconds, Flash said, All right, the Heart and Arrow it is. A thick mist was spreading through the trees, streaking the dark with gray. The night sounds were muffled, dimmed. Is there water close by? Flash asked his guide. Aye, replied Harn. We are but a mile or so from the great river. He was walking a few feet ahead of Flash. Can I follow the river to the capital? Perhaps. Do not fear, Outlander. I will see you reach the destination you seek, promised the bent man. The Heart and Arrow Inn sits beside the river, and when we reach it, I will help you chart your course. The river fog was chill. It was rolling in more rapidly now, filling the spaces between the giant tree trunks covering the mossy ground. You were indeed lucky, said Harn, after a moment, that I encountered you this night. Very few dare venture through this jungle once darkness has fallen. Why is that? Is it haunted? Just if you will, Outlander, but the guide stopped still. We must hurry, he said after a few seconds of nervous listening. What is it? Harn began trotting along the narrow trail they'd been following. The night brings many dangers with it. The night brings many dangers with it, he said over his shoulder. From off to their right came a loud thrashing. Which particular danger are we running from? It sounded to my ears very much like a salamander. A salamander? Why are... The crashing and cracking was echoed up ahead of them. Then Flash saw one of the creatures. It was 9 feet long, a muddy green with splotches of yellow running along its thick, glistening body. It opened its mouth wide, and Flash saw it, unlike any other of the tiny salamanders he was familiar with, in ways other than size. It had large, snake-like fangs. With a few more lumbering steps of its 4 squatty feet, the giant salamander blocked their path completely. Chapter 5. Zarkov was grumbling. His broad back was pressed against the black rock wall of a vast cavern, and he was complaining. It must be evening by now, he boomed. I have an excellent time sense. I'm not usually wrong. It's evening, and that's another meal missed. He made an attempt to scratch his ample beard, but the leather cords which bound his wrists prevented him from doing an adequate job. Several yards across the black cave, a small fire burned, setting sooty smoke up to vanish in the thick shadows. Seated near the fire were 3 lean men wearing hooded robes and sandals. I've been in captivity on 6 planets, 4 satellites, and 1 lesser moon, continued the bearded scientist in his big voice. They always made a point of feeding me, especially on Jupiter, where they were fattening me up for an impending cannibal feast, which, fortunately... You must be patient. One of the robed men stood to face the trussed Zarkov. These are difficult times on Mongo. Many people do not eat at all. It is especially difficult for us, who are sorcerers, and therefore, if you were any kind of sorcerers, you'd magic up a meal. Wait until our leader arrives. We will see to all your needs then, promised the hooded sorcerer. Zarkov had been a prisoner several hours. His flying safety belt had worked perfectly after a brief initial period of uncontrolled plummeting. He had drifted down through the bright day. The controls functioned well, and he had been able to aim himself at the road he saw below. "Look at the size of that Linaria canadensis," he remarked as he made a bouncing, dust-raising landing in the jungle roadway. The weeds, giant yet delicate, rose up from the heights of 5 and 6 feet. Fists on hips, Zarkov surveyed his landing place. "Fascinating," he decided. "Exactly what I expected." Loosening the flying belt, he shoved one big hand into a pocket of his work suit and brought out a carob-coated protein square. He was about to pop it into his mouth when he heard something. A very small sound, but he was certain it had been made by a foot stepping on a dry twig. Scratching at his bushy beard, Zarkov strode across the road to peer into the high forest. "I've had all kinds of receptions in my 40-odd years," he said to himself, "and usually the ones who come sneaking and pussyfooting mean you the least good." Someone dropped down on his back from the trees above. An arm circled his thick neck, tightening. "What's this?" roared Zarkov. He swung his fist back, feeling it connect with a nose. "Nay, Brother Igon, don't damage his brain," cautioned a voice from out of the brush. "We need his impressive intellect." From the corner of his eye, Zarkov got a glimpse of the man riding his back and of a metal rod poised to strike. Zarkov dropped backwards, slamming the man into the trunk of a tree. The man barked out his breath and let go. The doctor took a step clear, but was jumped by 2 other men. Each was tall and powerful, wearing a hooded robe. Zarkov got rid of one with a slashing uppercut. The other hooded man held tight. "This will cause too much damage to us all," said the one called Brother Igon. "Use the flask on him, Brother Beltor." A cork popped, green fumes spilled into Zarkov's face. He gave one more angry bellow before falling forward into a bush thick with spiky branches. He had awakened, thoroughly tied at wrist and ankle, in this huge black-walled cave. Now, catching the attention of the one called Brother Beltor, Dr. Zarkov said, "Let me ask you something which has nothing to do with food. When you 3 grabbed me, something was said about my intelligence, my intellect. Granted, I'm one of the more brilliant men in the universe. Still, it's certain my reputation doesn't extend to Mongo." "That is true, Dr. Zarkov," replied Brother Beltor. We believe one with your mental capacities can do much to aid the sorcerer's cause." "But how did you know for sure I had such mental capacities?" The lean sorcerer spread out his hands. "We read your mind," he said simply.